Hello everyone, I'm Colin Kinnett, and today I'm frustrated because I just received a report from yet another woodworking YouTuber who injured themselves using a table saw. And it frustrates me that we still don't seem to have this nailed down. So today I want to go through a very few quick, simple, and really important tips on table saw safety. And for those of you who are experienced, I have something else for that as well. So let's zip over to the table saw. Well, I've been woodworking for well over 50 years and I have not had any serious damage, but I'm not foolish enough to think it could not happen to me because accidents can happen at any time. You can never predict what's going to happen. All you can do is reduce the risk. And today I want to show you just a quick few things that you can do to make sure that you reduce that risk. And for those of you who are experienced woodworkers, later on I'm going to show you what your biggest issue would be with the table saw. So let's have a look. Now it goes without saying, the two most important things on the table saw are good hearing protection and good eye protection. I'm not going to be wearing those today because I'm not going to be cutting any wood. What I do want to talk briefly about is the blade guard and a splitter or riving knife. Now, I'm going to be taking this off in a moment, but if you have a saw that has these, I encourage you to use it. I've seen people get brand new saws, and the first thing they do is take this off. My saw is about 12 years old, and it needed a little bit of work. It wasn't the best blade guard, but I did a little bit of work, and now it works fine, and I use it all the time, and I'll tell you why. Two things. With mine, it's solid on the top, so it prevents any wood from flying out at me. Very important. The second thing is it makes my dust collector much more efficient because all of the chips and everything that fly off sort of rotate around inside, and then they still get sucked down inside and are taken away by the dust collector. So if you have one of these, I encourage you to check it out and make sure that you can get one that works. So generally a splitter, and I didn't tighten mine on here so it should just slide up. Generally a splitter will be attached to a blade guard like this one. A riving knife will be a singular slot similar to this, and it will fit down in there. And sometimes a splitter will rise up and down with the blade. Sometimes only a riving knife will slide up and down as you raise and lower the blade. But there are thousands and thousands of people out there who don't have splitters or riving knives, and you know what? They still cut wood safely, and that's what I want to cover off today. So I'm taking both of these away. The next two things I talk about are arguably the most important things when using the table saw. And the first one is a push stick. Back in the day, we used to call these chicken's foot push sticks, and here's what I don't like about them. First of all, when you're pushing the wood through the saw, you'll notice that at the beginning of the cut, the blade is coming down over the wood. But as you're moving through the saw, look at where the blade is coming up. And what happens when you're using a chicken's foot like this and the blade is coming up? Look at what can happen. I've seen this happen many times, and when you have a push stick like this, you can't force that wood down. That blade is going to, in an instant, is going to fly that piece of wood up and into the operator. The second thing with these, and I've seen this happen many times, is when you're pushing wood through the saw, what happens as the wood is moving through the saw, look at what's happening way up here. This starts to pull. Look at that pulling away from the saw. See that little bit of a gap in there? So what happens when it gets, see that, you can see that gap getting bigger and bigger as you're pushing. And what happens, the next thing that happens is the blade, because it's pushing up, is now going to pull that wood and grab it in an instant and throw it back at the operator. Now that's what I dislike about these. The next best, or the best push stick to use, John Hine said this a number of years ago. He confirmed what I've been saying for years. These are the best push sticks that you can get. And the reason is You have a catch back here to catch the wood, and as you're pushing the wood through, you're holding down on it. Your hand is pushing down on the wood, so it can't force up and it can't reel back because you're pushing it all forward. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, and my saw is going to make a noise when I wind it down here. Always when you're pushing wood through the saw, you want the tooth to be a half, or the blade to be a half tooth, no more than a half tooth above the material. And the reason for that is now when you're pushing through, you have less risk of severing or damaging a digit if you're going through. You have less risk of the saw kicking back because there's not so much friction in here, and there's less a chance of it catching the saw, especially if you're using a push stick like this. So two very, very critical things, and that is the push stick and the height of the blade above the material. Another thing I see from time to time is people trying to cut plywood on their table saw and when they're working alone, and you're trying to balance a sheet or a half sheet, a little bit of it against the fence, and then push it through the saw. Look, here's what I recommend for breaking down plywood. Use a circular saw. And you know what? You don't need to go out and buy a $1,000 track saw to break down a sheet of plywood. There are jigs that you can make for this. They will give you absolutely accurate cuts for that. And I'll put a link in the description box below that you can see that jig. So let me show you detail of this. Now I'm just using thin plywood as a demonstration here, but any plywood or sheet goods will be the same. So look at here, what we have here. As we're pushing plywood through the table saw, look at what we have here. 8 inches of friction rubbing against that wood in there. And as you're pushing through, if something happens and this blade is going to catch that plywood, it's going to pull it back fiercely like that. Now look at what happens when you put the blade at the proper height. And there you can see I'm still a little bit low. There we go. There we're about half a tooth above the material. And look there's just a tiny bit of material here. So even if this did catch, there's not going to be the same resistance because there's not 8 inches of pressure on this wood to come back like this. So this is something that you could much more easily recover from. So again, the height of the blade is critical. So for those experienced woodworkers who have sat through this and kind of know what I've just talked about, 2 things. I need you to help me with inexperienced woodworkers, to help them, to show them the safest ways to do things. But for us, the biggest challenge is complacency. When we've worked with a saw, maybe we're rushing through a project, we just have a couple more cuts to make, we're recutting something, we've already cut it twice, and it wasn't the right size. Complacency is our biggest challenge because we've worked with the saw so much. Oh, I can do that. I'll just run this quickly through and then it'll be done. And those are the things that can get us into trouble. Every time I turn the saw on, I stop and take a breath because I don't want the saw to bite me. And the moment we become complacent about using any tools, that's what can happen, is the tool will always win if we're not paying attention and doing things safely. So you can help me and you can help yourselves by making sure that we're taking a moment to do things correctly. And there's one last thing that I often look at when I come in to use the saw. I have a fire extinguisher that's 2 steps from my table saw, and if you don't have a fire extinguisher in your shop, that's probably one of the best investments you can make, and hope that it's an investment that you never get to use. Now, I have another video that I think you'll enjoy, and I put a link to that here. You'll be able to go and have a look at that. I'm Colin Canet for Woodwork Web. Thanks for watching, and I hope you work safely, and I hope that you spread the message to others to work safely as well.